Mitt Romney wins decisively in Florida's Republican primary. But was his victory more down to financial might than policy? You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Rutansi. If he was concerned after South Carolina, it was all smiles again for Mitt Romney in the latest leg of the Republican nomination race.
A competitive primary does not divide us, it prepares us, and we will win.
The former Massachusetts governor won the Florida primary by an overwhelming margin. It's winner takes all in this state, so he swept up all 50 delegates. And at this early stage, it appears Romney is well placed against his main rival, Newt Gingrich, in the forthcoming races. Nevertheless, Gingrich has vowed to keep fighting until the party convention. The former House Speaker argues the contest is now a two-horse race, and he hopes to galvanize the support of the two trailing candidates, Rick Santorum and Ron Paul, whose prospects now look bleak. It was a contest characterized by negative advertising funded by the now dominant political action committees. The main donors of these so-called super PACs have just been named, further underlining the vast wealth needed to influence a US election. As for the candidates, they touted various ideas during the campaign, from self-deportation to moon colonies. But in a state where a lot was said, was it in the end money that really did the talking? Our senior correspondent Alan Fisher has this from Tampa.
A big win, a significant win for Mitt Romney here in Florida. He and his team are already saying this proves that they can be competitive anywhere in the US, given Florida's diverse population, much more diverse than in the first three contests. And certainly we know that no Republican can win the White House unless they do well here in Florida. A disappointing night for Newt Gingrich. He left South Carolina with so much momentum after his big win there. But when he arrived here, he found that he was, in his words, being carpet bombed by negative ads. And certainly Mitt Romney's campaign spent big trying to drag down the former speaker. It pushed important issues in Florida, such as the economy and immigration, to the side, all drowned out in questions over character and past records. Now, the next few contests would seem to favour Mitt Romney. He's doing well in those states. But here's an interesting thing. They are caucuses. And Ron Paul has spent a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy in organising for the caucuses. He believes he can do well. And he will undoubtedly take votes. But will he take more votes from Newt Gingrich or Mitt Romney? Certainly, as Mitt Romney leaves Florida, he does so as the big winner so far.
So what factors won Florida, and will they win the presidency? Joining us in the studio now is Rich Galen, a Republican analyst and former communications director for Newt Gingrich. Next to him, Nick Nyhart, the president of the Public Campaign Action Fund, a group dedicated to campaign finance reform. And from Miami, Florida, Sergio Bustos, who's the political editor for the Miami Herald. Sergio Bustos, first of all then, what did we learn on Tuesday night in Florida then?
What we learned is money talks, organization's important, and you need momentum. And essentially, Mitt Romney staggered in here from South Carolina and really turned it around and showed he could win.
But win by outspending his rival through negative campaigning and flooding the airwaves. Is that really a good strategy going forward, even to the presidential election?
Indeed, it was the formula here. Remember, this isn't Iowa where you shake hands and go to town hall meetings. Same as New Hampshire, it's not that. Florida's 10 major media markets. You really got to have some money to really win in this state.
Well, let's give our audience a sense of the sort of adverts that were playing. I mean, they do appear to have had a huge role, even though in some exit polls voters suggested that the debates were also important. But clearly, you needed money for adverts, and these are the sort of adverts that were being broadcast in Florida.
4 more years of Barack Obama? Newt Gingrich's tough talk sounds good, but Newt has tons of baggage. How will he ever beat Obama? While Newt was Speaker, earmarks exploded. He co-sponsored a bill with Nancy Pelosi that would have given $60 million a year to a UN program supporting China's brutal one-child policy. And he teamed up with Pelosi on global warming. Beating Obama is important, too important to risk on Newt Gingrich. Restore Our Future is responsible for the content of this message.
The crime, Medicare fraud. The victims, American taxpayers. The boss, Mitt Romney. Romney supervised a company guilty of massive Medicare fraud. That's a fact. $25 million in unnecessary blood tests, right under Romney's nose. Romney pocketed $500,000. Cost to taxpayers, $40 million. Get the facts at mittsbloodmoney.com. Winning Our Future is responsible for the content of this ad.
Mitt's blood money. Rich Galen then, I mean, despite the enormous problems facing Florida, foreclosure, poverty, unemployment, this was about negative attacks, and indeed perhaps in the end about Mitt Romney proving that even though the party still doesn't like him much, if he is the presidential candidate, he can fight Obama negatively and flood the airwaves.
Well, I mean, the amount of money that was spent in Florida, I don't know, Sergio, what it was. It was probably in the $20 million range, I suspect. But that money didn't, I mean, that went into the economy. This is a good thing for Florida. That's why these states want to move up in the system.
Ironically, there was stimulus, even though they're against stimulus.
Well, no, that's exactly right. But I mean, they get to spend it where they want. The government doesn't tell them where to spend it. But I mean, they went into TV stations, radio stations, newspapers. You know, people were hired. A ton of money went into Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Florida, which is why these states want to get at the beginning of the process, because they want their share of that. And that doesn't even include the horde of media people. I think CNN's told me that they had 200 people. CNN had 200 people in Florida and in South Carolina.
All right, Sergio Bustos, great then for the TV networks, but what about those issues I mentioned, foreclosure, poverty and so forth? Did you really feel those issues were engaged with, real ideas were being presented to try and solve these desperate problems?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the whole issue of foreclosure is massive down here. The unemployment rate is higher than the rest of the nation. And those issues were really largely overlooked or ignored in the face of what we called here a Hurricane Mitt, Hurricane Newt.
Yeah, but even
as they went head to head,
Sergio,
these were Category 5 storms here.
Even in the debates,
Huge.
though, the moderators stayed away from those issues that I think a lot of people watching, and certainly if you followed the Twitter stream, people were saying, well, when are you going to ask about the economy? I mean, I think everybody shares in that. I don't think that's
there's a lot of blame to go around, but I mean, Nick Nyhart, when Newt Gingrich in the end in his speech, I'm not sure if it was a concession speech, but when he starts talking about protecting the people through repealing Dodd-Frank and Sarbanes-Oxley, you do start wondering whether words have simply lost their meaning at this point.
Well, I also think you should look at his words when he said the reason to vote for me is so that you don't have candidate Romney and his backers from Goldman Sachs running the country. So even a conservative Republican is saying there's something wrong with the amount of special interest money and implying that candidates owe their backers something.
Well, that's interesting, because the other interesting feature we have now to think about is the unprecedented surge of money in the election and the donors. They've just sort of been released, or at least partially released, for the super PACs. Let me just remind our audience what the super PACs are. These are super political action committees. A Supreme Court ruling in 2010 allowed so-called super PACs to spend unlimited funds as long as they didn't coordinate with the candidate. The biggest spender is the pro-Romney Restore Our Future super PAC, which has spent more than $17 million so far. Restore Our Future raised $30 million last year. Romney's former colleagues at Bain Capital have put in $2 million. Another major donor is hedge fund manager John Paulson, who's given $1 million. The pro-Gingrich Winning Our Future, which is just 2 months old, has spent nearly $9 million. It raised $2 million last December and got a big boost in January with a $10 million donation from casino billionaire Sheldon Adelson. And then there's also the pro-Obama Priorities USA action, which has started by 2 former White House aides. It's used up just over $300,000 so far, but has raised more than $4 million. Nick Nyhart, it's interesting that we've just suddenly got all these figures and an idea of some of who the donors are, but why now, after so many primaries have already taken place, wouldn't the voters in Florida and South Carolina and elsewhere have benefited from the knowledge that while Romney was talking about saving the middle class, he was being funded by hedge fund managers and various financial institutions who helped contribute to the problems of the middle class?
That's right. These numbers are just coming out right now, and it looks like, it may not be true, but the odds are this race has been decided, and we know who the candidates are going to be in November. We could have a higher standard. There could be instant reporting. In other words, as soon as a campaign cashes a check, they put on a website that they've gotten it in. So there's no reason, given the technology today, not to know instantaneously where the money comes from.
I agree absolutely. I'm really libertarian on this whole thing. That means that I really think less government is generally better in these sorts of things, and I'm a big First Amendment guy. So I mean, I understand that there are downsides, and I'm not shouting fire in a crowded movie theater, but I absolutely agree that the Congress can fix this in about an hour by requiring instant.
But still keeping that money in the system. But what happened?
But then it becomes a political question for the campaign. Right. Is this politically worth it to me to take this money from a hedge fund guy or from some rich guy in Chicago if you're Obama?
Right, and the answer is almost always that it's worth taking it. And the reason is a lot more people are going to see those negative ads that are going to go look up a campaign finance report.
But Nick Nyhart, what happened
there? You have to give the voters some responsibility to being citizens. I mean, you can't spoon feed them everything.
But for decades it seemed the trajectory was moving against having more money in political campaigns. And then suddenly we get this Supreme Court ruling that says corporations are people and have First Amendment rights and can spend unlimited money and so forth. Where did that come from? Was that rather sudden? What happened to campaign finance reform?
I mean, there have been two things that have been happening. One is, even without those terrible Supreme Court rulings, you've had a ratcheting up of how much it costs to run for office, mainly because candidates have always been dependent on fairly big money, people who give $1,000 or people who could bundle that amount of money. So ordinary people have never been the major funders of politics. And as that's ratcheted up, you've also seen the Supreme Court, in decision after decision in recent years, increase the amount of money that people can push into politics and increase the number of different kinds of entities that can do that. So now even corporations can intervene with their trillions of dollars in assets, can intervene in elections and spend as much money as they want.
But arguably, perhaps this is more honest instead of pretending to the American people that they did have a say in the first place in what's going on.
Well, and unions, by the way, could always do that. So, right. So this is a little bit.
And I think you used to see some parity between unions and corporations, but that's simply nowhere true anymore.
The problem is that the corporations have more money. Okay.
Sergio Bustos.
Yeah, let me just say that in Florida, we don't need to see the numbers on how much was spent. We saw it each night on television. Right. We heard it on the radio. One interesting anecdote, there was a very influential Spanish language radio station in Miami who actually apologized to their audience for reducing programming because they had to accommodate so many ads. That's how bad it got here.
But what was strange, though, was during the campaign, Sergio Bustos, both Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney seemed to say that they hated super PACs, even though they were benefiting from them. Was that plausible? Are they even that? I mean, they're supposed to be completely separate from these super PACs, and perhaps they were making that point. But is that even plausible?
It's interesting because while everyone hates the negative ads, when we talk to voters, both through our polling, which we've done, and on the street, voters always end up quoting the very ads they hate. So go figure.
Yeah, I've written about this, Sergio, and I think the reason is that people are hardwired to like gossip. I think probably in any language. We all say we don't, but if you overhear somebody, you kind of stop and listen in. So we all like gossip, and a negative ad is highly distilled 30 or 60 seconds of gossip. And so, as Sergio says, people remember it, and it has an effect. If it didn't work, nobody would do it.
Nick Nyhart, it's beginning to sound like there's a broadcast industrial complex here, but at least the broadcasters like getting the money, the politicians like the negative ads, but no one feels there's a responsibility to talk about the issues.
Either candidate could certainly say, I want these negative ads to end tomorrow. And in fact, in Massachusetts, the two candidates there have made an agreement that they have sort of a pledge to turn back that outside money. And in fact, either campaign will have to pay a penalty if they don't stop the outside money from coming in. So there are things candidates can do to turn it back if they really want to, but they don't want to because it gives them an edge. And if you have a 5-to-1 spending advantage, you want that to continue. And you know the people who put the money into that, that you owe them for the success of your campaign, and that's the larger problem.
So who owes the SEIU and AFSCME and
the unions you were talking about?
The unions who put and the organizations associated with President Obama, who spent about $6 million on ads against Romney, which helped balance the scales.
You know, I think there are some differences between PACs that take their money from large numbers of people making relatively small contributions and super PACs that take money $1 million a pop from hedge fund operators on Wall Street.
But President Obama, though, himself, at the moment, though, is raking in the money.
Such a dim view of people. I weep.
President Obama, though, however, whatever he says about it.
I think I have an accurate view of people.
Whatever he says
if someone elects them, they owe them.
Whatever he says about super PACs, President Obama is raking in the contributions for his presidential campaign, not through super PACs, from the same interests that were sort of spending a fortune, the 1% of the 1% that were spending a fortune on Gingrich and Romney in Florida. The unions perhaps have relatively less clout in this than the same sort of Goldman Sachs type donors who are giving Obama the money and are giving Romney and Newt Gingrich the money, though, perhaps.
You know, I think both sides.
Sergio, we'll come to you in a second. Quickly, Nick.
I think both sides are going to take money from interest. The question is, do ordinary people have a say in this? And as long as candidates are dependent on these 7- and even 8-figure contributions, they're not going to be owing ordinary Americans and focusing on ordinary Americans in the elections. And that's what's got to change.
Sergio Bustos.
Yeah, as we near November, you'll see a huge concentration of ads, not all over the country necessarily, but they're going to be in the states that are very highly contested. You're talking about Florida, Ohio. They've talked about North Carolina and Virginia. These are the states where you're going to see the voters there are just going to be inundated with ads on their TV and on their radio and over the internet.
But Rich Galen, as we go to a presidential election, if President Obama and whoever is the Republican candidate are receiving enormous amounts of campaign contributions from pretty much the same type of source, I mean, you mentioned the unions, but in the end they'll probably be dwarfed by the hedge fund managers and Wall Street and so forth, and perhaps Hollywood as well. What do they want in return from whoever becomes president, and does that mean we'll ever actually even get change? This is an entirely fixed system in the first place.
Well, everybody promises change for every election. We both kind of started our careers at the local level, and our candidates for city council or state representative, we always promise change. And the fact is that Connecticut's a great example. For a while, they had a third-party governor, right? In what was his name?
Lowell Weicker.
Yeah, Lowell Weicker. And that lasted one term, and everybody went back. They went back to the old ways again because everybody's comfortable operating in the old ways. I don't know that people go out of their way to do illegal favors for people that help them get there.
Not illegal, but certainly they would be bold.
But it certainly does get them access.
So
there's no question about it.
Connecticut's a good example because they actually a couple of years ago switched to a system where candidates who raised a large number of small contributions could get some public matching funds. And they also banned lobbyist contributions. And at the end of the last legislative session, instead of the legislators asking the lobbyists for what do you want, and we're going into the closing days of the session, what's on your list, the lobbyists were quiet and the legislators weren't paying any attention to them. And I think that's what you want. Politicians, whether they're on the right or the left, owing their constituents rather than owing lobbyists or hedge fund operators.
Nick, that's a really interesting point because we were talking about the presidential campaign and the primaries. We haven't even talked about Congress and the amount of money that's flowing in there through the lobbyists. So you've got presidential candidates who apparently owe favors to people who got them into power. Then you've got Congress who are raking in the money from lobbyists. Again, what hope is there for the 99%?
Well, the 99% doesn't really play in this. It's about 1/10 of 1% that give $1,000 or greater contributions. And with the super PACs, you're seeing people writing $1 million checks. In fact, the Romney super PAC had just 200 contributors contributing a total of $18 million to his campaign. That's a $90,000 average contribution.
That's very efficient.
That can't restore the faith. When Americans think, who put my president in place?
But I mean, you look at the laws that the Congress passes. You look at the laws that state legislatures pass.
Right.
And more often than not all the time, there's no 100%, but the rights of the little person are very often not only protected, but enhanced. And so you get to a situation in America now, and we can get into the tax code and everything else, but people generally, mostly because we have such a free press, that and Sergio is a leading member of this, is that they keep an eye on this. So whatever comes out, no matter who they promised what to, they still have to appeal.
I think the quote unquote little people are having a big hard time now trusting government. The approval ratings for Congress,
I'm not a little
approval
guy.
ratings for Congress, and the polls show single-digit approval ratings or in the low teens. We took a look at the Romney regular, the Romney regular PAC contributions, and we did a scan for people who listed their occupation as CEO or COO or CFO or president. And there were over 1,000 people out of the 20,000 or so with those kinds of titles. You check for maids or janitors, not a one in the thousands of contributions.
They don't have that kind of disposable income.
But when money is that important,
and nor will they ever have
think
disposable
people feel
income
like they're left out of the system.
That's not
Policy
true.
won't be changed to allow them to have the disposable income.
If you're for redistribution of income in America, that's fine. I'm not.
Let me ask you, you're a candidate running for president. Someone comes and writes you two $5 million checks. Don't you feel like they have a special place for you?
Of course they do, but that doesn't
way?
mean but that doesn't mean I'm going to. That means like I'll have dinner with them, but that doesn't mean I'm going to vote for something that I otherwise would be opposed to. I wouldn't do it.
So, Sergio Bustos, it just seems so blatant.
I think unfortunately, though,
it just seems it's so blatant now that we have super PACs and we have the Citizens United ruling and everything else. Do you not feel that enough might be enough soon, that there's some enormous backlash might occur? I mean, certainly in Florida, it seemed, at least those attending the Republican primary seemed to accept the fact that this is a pretty much a bought process.
And in fact, keep laughing when you say things like that. I mean, why are you being so snide about the American process? It works pretty well.
It's quite shocking.
We generally
actually.
get it right
No, but
when you have
very
9% approval ratings for Congress, how is that working well?
When we're choosing, well,
I mean, a lot of Americans are laughing and sort of being a bit snide about it.
These are record lows. These are unprecedented lows.
That's because more people are watching.
They were much higher when you were working in Congress.
That's because I was much more adamant about keeping track of the little people. But don't be snide about the American process. It works. It looks ugly, and it is ugly to a great degree. But again, for candidates who choose to do this, whether it's city council or president of the United States, the overwhelming majority of them do it for the right
Nick
reason.
Nyhart, I feel my nationality is working against me here. As an American, do you feel then that this is working?
Let me just
Sergio, first
here
you
real
then.
quick. Yeah,
go ahead.
Let me just say that even the tone of the debate here is just a reflection of what's going to happen with the campaign. And if anything, one thing is certain about the impact of money in politics is it's just going to continue to fuel the tremendous cynicism there is among Americans. We see it with the voters we talk to. Even turnout in this particular primary, the number of people going to the polls was expected to be about 2 million. It was actually less than 1.7 million.
And what was it? What was it 4 years ago?
Part of it.
What was it 4 years ago, sir?
What was it? Well, 4 years ago, you're talking 2008.
Yeah.
You're talking about the primary with McCain and the others. It was less.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So it was more than.
It was 1 point. Well, hold on. Let me finish my point though.
Okay.
We have a few seconds left.
1.9 million back in 2008.
Well, that's within the margin.
My point is this: the turnout. You can't argue that in part may have been driven by the cynicism that you see on the part of voters because they see all the money flowing and splashing all around in politics.
Nick Nyhart, does this just translate into cynicism, or does this change into a wish for change, real change, and transformation of the political system?
Well, it's both. If people don't get change, they'll be cynical for the long haul. There are fortunately things you can do. You can have a system where only small donations are allowed, and candidates run on a combination of small donations and public funds. There's a bill that Senator Dick Durbin sponsored in the Senate that could well pass. I think the most important thing people can do, if they're concerned about this, is find out where the candidate stands on changing the money in politics system. Are they going to be for systems of greater transparency? Are they going to support a small donor-driven public financing system like the Fair Elections Act? And are they going to support change in the Constitution? Because we need to do that to undo the Citizens United case.
Rich Galen, I mean, do you think that once people do look a bit deeper into money in politics, that they will simply say, no, the system is working, we shouldn't be snide about it, we shouldn't change it?
I think they understand the system is not working. I think we can do things. We absolutely agree on transparency. I mean, there's no reason for us to have to wait, as you said, 6 weeks to find out who gave money on December 15th. That's insane. But I'm just opposed to using, to go to your point, or maybe Sergio's point, that we have all these problems in the country to then take public money, taxpayer money, and use it on partisan activities. I'm not even in favor of paying for primaries. I think the parties ought to pay for that. But to take money out of the system that really can be used to fix roads, schools, and all those sorts of things and give it to candidates to run for public office. I think it's a tremendous waste of taxpayers' money.
You know, as a taxpayer,
5 seconds,
I would love the government to amplify the money, whereas a small donor, I give that to a candidate and they get additional matching funds. I have a bigger voice. That's a good thing.
Make my donation tax deductible.
Rich Galen, Nick Nyhart, thank you very much. Sergio Bustos, thank you very much as well.
Sergio.
And that's all from Inside Story here in Washington, D.C. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at InsideStory@aljazeera.net.